All right. Hey there, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jerry Ida, and I am the VP of Customer Success here at Platform. And I'm here with my colleague, Jared Wright, and we've been talking about putting together a session like this, best practices for optimal infrastructure performance with Magento, with Adobe Commerce, and partly because a lot of the work that we do here at Platform is work with merchants and e-commerce businesses alike, and we run through a series of best practices. And what we've been able to do over the last few years is distill a lot of the fine tunings and tools and other things that customers can take advantage of and put it all together into a checklist of items that customers can just bring to the table, bring right from the get-go and work with uh, Platform and run really well. Uh, so in my experience here, I've been at Platform for the last 5 years, and I have been working a few different capacities. Primarily, when I came over to Platform, I was interested in working with the Adobe Commerce folks, which is our largest white label partner here at Platform. And since then, I've grown my role into various responsibilities, primarily around managing and supporting the customers that we have, our largest customers, and a lot of them are in the Magento and e-commerce space. So we'll be talking more about some of the technical details here with Jared in a little bit. And in case you're wondering, I'm based in Detroit, Michigan, right here in the US, and I will kick it over to my partner, Jared, here.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jared Wright. I'm based in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, southern tip right over there. 20 years of hosting experience, 6 years at Platform.sh. I was an early remote worker, 2009. I think I started remote working with Rackspace and then just moved around. And yeah, I really believe in creating strong promoters of your product with strong technical support. So if you can really show customers how to use your product and good examples, I really do think they're going to go out there and make a big difference for you. So yeah, the big thing is like Magento is amazing. It's super powerful. It's super flexible. You can put different modules in it. You can write custom plugins. It's got tons of feature-rich modules just built into it already, but it can be really complex to scale. Customers have very complex product catalogs, sometimes very large. There's a lot of traffic coming to their site, or they're having like big checkout events like Black Friday. Black Friday is one of our big fun experiences every year. We have to resize our clusters and get them ready for Black Friday and make sure that they have these sort of optimizations. So the optimizations we be speaking about have come from years and years of getting ready for Black Friday, making sure the latest tweaks are out there. What our customers ask us daily. So Jerry's and I, we work in support. We have conversations with customers every day, and the easiest things that we can distill it down to is how can I make my website respond faster? How can I scale my website out for big events? And when I am deploying, how can I make that downtime as minimal as possible? So those three big questions can really be answered hopefully with use of our templates, our webinar, and our recent blog post, which I'll show you the link for. And it really is going to be like, how can we efficiently scale? How can we make it easy for you to scale? And the best practices for Magento to make sure the application is running as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and a lot of these points that Jared's going to walk us through comes with experience of working with several thousand customers. We're up to 7,000 different projects that we work with across all of our customers in the e-commerce space. And what Jared has helped us do is aggregate all this information into easily digestible blog posts that we have just posted this week. And we'll be walking through exactly what that looks like here just now.
Yeah, so there's a link to the blog post. It has all this content and a little bit more in. It also has links to the template that we're going to be discussing. So it's definitely worth checking out. So what are the best practices for Magento performance? So there's multiple aspects to it. we can first look at the infrastructure, get that optimized. That can be things like making sure the right resources are assigned to your database, or making sure you have enough memory, or a certain config is applied. We can look at different ways of caching. So Redis caching, session caching, HTTP cache. So the op cache, there's lots of different ways you can cache your site, and there's lots of different layers to it. You can also look at how best to set up your database for Magento. So as Magento has matured, and as MariaDB and MySQL have matured, a few of the default settings have diverged, and this can cause sometimes problems for basic Magento reindex commands and things like that. So we can discuss a little bit of that too. And then streamlining your deployment process. This is the key to try and get down to that zero downtime deployment. Not quite possible yet, but we're getting there. And then last but not least is, and it should be hopefully already added to your site, but using a CDN and then integrating that CDN with your Magento application. So the way we thought it would be the best to get this information out there and to get these best practices out there is to put into our template. So you can go right now onto our template page, GitHub, Platform.sh templates. You can click on the template and click on deploy on Platform.sh, and it will build and it will deploy straight to Platform.sh, one-click installation. You'll be able to log in, go into the back end, add new products, add new users, and it's already a fully functional site. How did we get there? How did we make it a one-click install? How did we simplify it? So we use things like ECE tools. This is a tooling package. Oh, sorry, Jerry's. Oh,
No, go ahead.
So this is a tooling package that Adobe wrote just to make Magento and cloud deployments really easy for their users. So check it out. We're going to be mentioning a few things, but ECE tools, definitely one of those integral parts of making it work on platform. We also have the Fastly module written by Fastly themselves. We have a disable two-factor authentication module. This just really makes it easy to log into your website for the first time if your site or environment doesn't have mail already set up. So on a Platform.sh development project, your mail service isn't delivering mail perfectly as when you first select it and first activate it. You still need to add your domains and things like that. And if you haven't added your domains, you can't log into your Magento backend without this module. We also include like a little Swiss Army knife tool for Magento admins, Mage Run 2. It's also just to show how you can add any little tools you need into your composed JSON file and use them in your build every day. And the thing that makes it quite easy for us to make this one-click install is that we don't have to have any Magento repo.magento.com authentication keys. We use the Mage OS mirror. So we use the Mage OS mirror to pull down the Magento files and deploy to Platform.sh. If you would like to change, you can change to the repo.magento mirror and set up your auth keys. There is a little guide. And just something that I always like to mention to customers, you can use the auth.json to save those auth keys, but that means you're committing those files to your repo. So rather just use an environmental variable. Just make sure that you're never committing any sensitive data to your Git repos. Yeah. So what did we change? What did we add in? The magento.env.yaml file. So this is like the core application config file for Magento. It doesn't really have much to do with Platform.sh, but it does decide how Magento will run on Platform.sh. And I just thought it'd be easier just to go through this with everyone. Let me just zoom in a bit here. There we go. So what does the file have inside of it? The first thing it has is these variables. So these variables are used by ECE tools. ECE tools reads in these variables and it's looking for in variable called relationships. And we tell it, when you're looking for a variable called relationships, match it to platform relationships. Same for the roots, same for the variables, same for our environment settings. Now, this is where all your database passwords are stored. These are where all your root settings are stored, which domain this environment's going to host for you. So it really makes it easy. You don't have to worry about any of that when you're deploying now. It all just gets read and then deployed. I also have added a few examples of other things, X-frame configuration, Sometimes customers need to set secure settings. This is one of the settings they ask us for. All of these settings, you can go and search on the internet and you can see how it's matched up and what the options are. These are just our best practices. But if you have a certain third-party request, you might have to change that setting. If it's coming from an unsecure resource due to some old integration, you might have to change that setting. And that applies for all the settings. It's worth going to just check them yourselves, just making sure that they fit your application, the way you've set up your application. In the build section, I've just added a little example of a quality patch and how to add it. So sometimes if you reach out to Adobe support, they may give you a special number and a quality patch and say, this patch will fix this problem and it will be fixed in the next version of Adobe Commerce. So you can apply quality patches just like that. Just nice to have an example. This is a legitimate quality patch from Adobe with, I think it was an open search reindex bug on their latest version, and it will be fixed in 2.4.8. So yeah, that's quite nice to have an example there just so that people know how to use it. And then we also have SCD Strategy Compact. We'll cover this in a later slide, but it's just worth just knowing that there is an SCD option here. This is the option to make sure it's built on, so your SCD is built in your build hook. And we also have a little section here which says skip SCD true. So to make sure that we never build SCD in your deployment hook, we're only doing it in your build hook. A few other options. This one's very useful for scaling. MySQL use slave connection. We set it to false by default for a reason. If you enable to true, you do get about 150 milliseconds more response time on your application. But if you're serving hundreds and thousands of requests a second, the 150 milliseconds is usually quite acceptable. So if you're doing a Black Friday scale event, that's when it's time to use the Redis, the MySQL slave connection. But it is there. Again, it's nice to have it in the config so you can switch it on and off as you need. You don't have to worry about what the setting name is. Redis backend. So there are multiple options for Redis backends. You can set to file, database, sorry, not Redis backends, cache backends, file, database, or Redis. And there is this third option that has been introduced, which is the remote synchronized cache. And that's L2 cache. And what that does is it just adds an extra layer of caching to Redis. It stores the files locally a little bit so that when you are requesting a read of a known key that hasn't changed, it will serve it from a local file system, dev.shm, instead of your Redis server, which might require a TCP connection, like a little bit extra latency. So this really does help for really busy sites. And actually help.
Let me ask, so what is L2 cache versus stale cache that you had listed on your bullet points there?
Oh yeah, so stale cache is an interesting one. When we've seen it quite often is, let's say you're working on your Redis backend, your Magento backend, and you've made a big theme change or a big product change, and you need to clear your cache. If you're doing that during a busy period, that can affect your customers. That can give you sometimes 30 seconds of downtime when you clear that cache. So if you select stale cache, what will happen is that the cache will be cleared, but in the interim, while your new cache is being built up, it will be serving stale Redis keys and stale cache to your customers. So their sites are still loading, they're still getting 200s, and they're not getting any 500s. And once your Redis cache has then been cleaned and flushed and is repopulated, it will start serving that cache again. So super useful. If you're in a busy period and you have to make a change and you have to clear your cache, you want that setting enabled. There are some times where you don't want it enabled too.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, so for those less technical folks, how does that caching actually help improve performance there?
So it improves performance where if you are making changes to your cache, you're not getting errors. You're not going to get like a few 500s for 10 seconds. You'll get no 500s, but they won't be served as cleanly as the other requests. But usually when you're cleaning cache, you may be cleaning like your layout or your block HTML. So you don't have to worry about it that much. It's not, you're not serving bad data. You're not going to get bad orders coming through. Another thing that helps, that goes hand in hand with stale cache, definitely worth mentioning, is connect retries and read timeouts. So what can happen is, again, if you're flushing your cache and you're not using stale cache, let's say you have a plugin that doesn't work well with stale cache. Instead, what you can do is say, when I get a Redis error, retry 3 times. And instead of waiting 2 seconds, because in reality, Redis should really respond within a few milliseconds. But if I have to wait 10 seconds, wait 10 seconds and serve that page cleanly. So you can use both of the options together, or you can switch off stale cache and maybe increase these retries. Something that we mentioned in the blog post, and something that we don't really mention yet because we don't really get into like the exact numbers, but if you have a Redis server of over 8 gigs and you're using an HA Redis cluster, that 8 gigs really takes a long time to be correctly cleared, correctly flushed, and repopulated. So it may seem simple, oh, I'm just clearing the Redis cache, but it could actually cause 30, 45 seconds of downtime. There are some infrastructure optimizations that Platform.sh has added to make it less, but you are also constrained by the actual network connectivity between the nodes. So yeah, these are just little things, again, that make it easier and make it more resilient to run it on Platform.sh and to run on any scalable architecture, really. So we also have session configuration. So this should actually be default in the configuration, because it just makes life a lot easier. Instead of having one Redis service that serves cache and sessions, we can now split it to 2 services, one just for sessions, one just for cache. And Redis isn't a multi-threaded service. So having 2 separate services really makes it quite nice to perform it. Yeah, and then we have the timeouts there too, just to make sure that if you are doing anything strange to your session cache, you'd rather that session get served than timeout and get an error page. Something that we really see a lot and really helps is using Redis slave connections, especially if you are on a highly available cluster. It just means that some of your requests can go to your 2 unused Redis nodes that are reading nodes or in sync, and then your write request can go to your writer nodes, your write node. Another one that's super important, it just makes life a lot easier, again, to run it on platform. Max messages 250. Again, you can change this value. That's just a number that I came up with, just to make my life easier for a fairly small store. But what this means is, when I'm running a cron consumer, don't run it indefinitely. That's the default. So what happens is you start running a consumer. A consumer is like a Magento message worker queue processor. And when you start one, it would just run forever. And it would cause issues with shutting down the container in the deployment. It would sometimes cause issues with resources. So what we have set here is eat 250 messages. And once you've done your 250 messages, shut down, and then it will be started again in the next cron process. I'll show you the cron process in one of the next slides. And then we also just have an example of how to do a post-deploy warm-up, just so you can actually select, warm up all my product pages, or warm up all my category pages. You can also set it to store in just one site, or you can also just set it to, say, warm up only my help pages, or things like that. So yeah, that's the Magento env.yaml. This is very, very Magento focused. This is not really platform focused, but you can see how having the right options here, especially up here, makes life a lot easier. If you get those correct variables set up, you can then almost plug into the EC tools world and make your deployment life a lot easier.
And
So
Jared, customers have access to the template, right? It's publicly available. They could access the Magento environment YAML straight through. Okay.
They can see that right now. It's on that URL. They can go and view that YAML file, and they can go compare it to their own. Obviously, they may have some sections in there. They go, oh no, we've done this because of this module. But again, it's worth going to check it out, comparing it. If you have any questions, you can definitely reach out. We can go through it with you. So that's the env.yaml. That's really the core of the app. then you have to really get to the core of Platform.sh and how we respond to that application config and how we build a nice environment for it. So
can you explain how the platform app.yaml is different than the Magento env.yaml?
Yeah, so the Magento env.yaml doesn't really get read by our processes at all. It really gets read by ECE tools and the Magento application when it's deploying. And in the app.yaml, that's really focused on, that's where all Platform.sh's secret sauce is. That's how do we set up the site. That's how, and we'll go through it now, how to build the site, how to deploy. So you can just have a quick look here. We have a few environmental variables. This is how you set them on platform. Again, you can set any environmental variables. If you have any custom modules or anything, again, I wouldn't recommend setting anything sensitive in your YAML file. They can be set on your project and variables, and they merge together for you. Here's an example of how to set some indexer batch sizes and a document that just refers to why we chose these sizes. And like we're saying, like this is where all the secret sauce is. So this is how we set up our relationships in Platform.sh. So the relationship names, normally for most applications, you can choose whatever you want. You can call your database DB, you can call it data, but for ECE tools, it really does rely on these names, not necessarily the service names, but the relationship names. So make sure that your relationship names are called database, database slave, Redis, Redis slave, and Redis session. If it's underscore or if it's slightly misspelled or if it's anything different, ECE tools won't detect that relationship and will just treat it like it's another unknown relationship. Something to also note, if you're not on a highly available infrastructure, you won't see this Redis slave connection. It won't be presented, this relationship. So this is also quite a nice way to have a config that works on normal standard environments and on a highly available environments. The mounts are fairly simple, fairly standard for Adobe Commerce. Something we did also see, a lot of modern developers are now looking at PWAs in front of Adobe Commerce. So that usually requires Node.js. So we just put an example of how to install Node.js, any version you want, again, using your environmental variables up here. So we install the latest version of NVM, and NVM is like a Node version manager. So it allows you to choose which version of Node you install. And then over here, we say install Node version 20. So our little section over here, there highlighted there, that will install Node 20 for you. And the nice little thing, using these few commands here, these last few echo commands, it also doesn't just make it available to your build environment, it also makes it available to your application environment. So after we build this application and we log in via SSH, we'll have access to Node 20 if we wanted to use Node 20 for anything. In our build hook, we have this little last command here. It's quite important. Again, it's probably not standard. You can take it out if you do have a production site. But what this basically does is it changes all the crons in the repo to run sequentially instead of concurrently. So what we did see before, sometimes 14 to 30 crons starting at the same time, service runs out of memory, causes deployments to fail, it causes other things to fail. It really doesn't give a really great user experience. So what we adjusted, just to make sure that the application can work anywhere and everywhere, when we do build the application, make sure we force the crons to run one after each other instead of run at the same time.
Okay, so, let me pause you there, because so much of what Magento is crons, right? Running crons.
Yeah, exactly.
Tasks and why again is it important to have them run sequentially if we can versus
if we can
simultaneously?
That's why I said it's something that you can take out or can look into and maybe just dig into a little bit more, because on a small environment, you might want them to run sequentially. On a really large environment, you have the capacity to push out 20 crons at the same time. But the nice thing is, and again, years of experience of working with this, because we have this, crons on Magento are a tough topic and they do use a lot of memory. So after all the experience we had, we've worked out you have to run your crons. So we can't just skip them. We can't kill them. We can't let them get killed. And from what we've seen, you can run them sequentially and get the same. Your mails will still get delivered. Your delivery messages will still get sent out to the vendors. Everything still does work. It's not as quick. But again, if you're scaling to HA, you'll be talking with us. We'll be working with you in a support ticket. We can adjust that and we can make you run 5 or 10, or we can actually look at your stats and say, okay, you can run this many. Another thing to look at is, it's not in this template, but we can also look at running workers instead of crons. So if you do need something that's running that often, we can put into a worker maybe instead of a cron.
What ways are we actually making adjustments on the infrastructure side to accommodate crons or even workers, just to allow them to better run? Are there memory limitations that we have to set or test across various processes? Are there other things that we look at?
So we do allow some leeway sometimes when these crons are running, so we don't kill them. It is a tough one. It is very focused on the amount of memory your application has available. So we have things like flexible resources, which we've added in to allow you to adjust the memory. We've added larger sizes. It is something really that we have looked at and spent a lot of time with, especially in our new products like Upsun. We've looked at making that memory configuration completely up to you, where you can change the memory to whatever you need. So if you did have enough memory, it's perfectly okay to run 20 crons at the same time. But if you are limited, this does help, and just make sure that you're not missing out on things and your crons aren't being killed. Same sort of thing. Oh, sorry.
When you say limited, I mean, we're talking about even large scale clusters that there's memory that's being shared across multiple services, whether it's MySQL or PHP or crons that are required. So we're having to always balance that with customers and what's consuming the most, right?
Yeah. So do you really want your cron processors eating 15 gigs of memory, or would you rather that 15 gigs of memory go to your MySQL service, which it really does benefit it?
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing. For example, we can run on a 4 CPU or an 8 CPU host, we could run 12 crons. And because we're overloading the host, it might actually be better just to run 1 cron at a time or 2 crons at a time, and you actually get through them quicker. And that's sort of like this little scripture basically works hand in hand with that line there. It basically goes through all your crons and runs them one at a time. Again, I just saw this today. We have a memory limit of -1. For crons, it is recommended. But if you do see memory issues, it might be worth limiting that. We've also added little things, just like, again, ease of life. Make sure that the template isn't going to self-destruct in 30 days, which sometimes you get these lovely apps. And it's like, run my app. And then you run it for 30 days and you realize, oh, there's a log folder that doesn't ever get cleaned. So we make sure that we rotate the log folder every 10 days, and we also clean up the reports folder. Some of my first years at Platform here, logging into reports folders with 2 million files and having to run Perl scripts to try and delete the files because it was too many files for the file system to even read and actually be able to run an RM-RF on. So it's very, very useful. Please keep the report cleanup cron in there. It will definitely save you some hassle in the long run. Another thing I just added in, because we did get examples of it and we did get questions from it in support. Often a customer will come to us and say, I need this website file. Well-known Apple developer. It can be many, but Apple developer merchant IDs are a good example. I need this website file to be served on this URL. So this is an example of that. So that's the URL that the file has to be served on. And then I gave an example of a pass-through. So a pass-through allows you to say, this file will be served by this file on my mount. So you can just go to your media mount now, drop that file there, and it'll be served for you. Makes life a lot easier. in the past, some customers would commit these to their repos or do some crazy rewrites, but this really is just the easiest way to do it, just using a pass-through. And I think that is really it for the app.yaml file. Let's see what we have next year. Yeah, SED. So this is quite a contentious topic when it comes to Magento, because it really can make it a pleasant experience or an unpleasant experience. If you don't set your SED correctly, you can sometimes wait with the website that's down for 45 minutes while you're doing a deployment. And it appears to be the normal process, but it really is not the norm. That's not how Magento was designed. It was really designed to perform this SED process, static content deployment, in the build process. So before you've even started looking at the infrastructure and taking your site offline, while you're still building your app, we should be building your static content. There are ways to do this. It is worth reading through that guide that's above there. But just a good way to describe it is all your JavaScript files, all your theme files, all your modules, all your CSS, instead of building that while your site's offline and you're doing your deployment, rather build that early in your build hook. And if you don't want to build it at all, you can use SED on demand. It's not great for production because that means all those assets are being built as those first users are coming to visit the site. It's great for development because it means you can quickly turn through environments and test things, but yeah, you don't want it on production. To set up SED on build, it's just basically a summary of the guide above, but to set up SED on build, log into your app, run ECE tools wizard ideal state. It will give you a little summary, and it should give you a summary that says, now run ECE tools config dump. And that will dump the config file. Let me quickly give you an example of the config file, because when I first thought about it, I was like, oh, I don't really want my config file to be uploaded to my repo. So the nice thing is there's nothing secret or anything dangerous that would be uploaded to the repo. It's really just a few ID numbers, a few things that are enabled, different options like merge files in JS, some CSS options, and then the modules that you have and that you want to build. So that's really why it's important, is in the build hook, we have to know what modules you want activated and built. And this is where that config and the ideal state comes into play. So yeah, that's, again, using ECE tools to make your life a little bit easier. And again, if we want to get to that zero downtime deployment, this is sort of the place where you get there. You really have to. Platform.sh, obviously, we have some features and some work that we're doing to get to zero downtime, but the actual application itself also has to be able to be zero downtime deployed. So that's where this comes in.
Why does it matter again? The type of SCD you use? Why is it relevant in this case in terms of bringing down the times like you show here on the graph?
So it really is run. So SED by default would be run in your deployment hook. So at Platform.sh, we shut down your app in your deployment hook. So first you build, then you deploy. While you're deploying, your app is not responding. We're just holding on to connections. And then as soon as we leave a deployment hook and we go into post-deploy, then we start responding again. So if you have a whole SED process running in that deployment hook, it can sometimes take 45 minutes. If you have lots of themes and lots of cool features on your site, it can take, I've seen it take sometimes over 60 minutes to build the SEDs. Whereas if you're building that in your build hook, it might take longer in your build hook, but your site isn't offline. So it really does help. And again, you can customize this. If you set different environmental variables in your platform console, you can say, make the long builds happen only for production, but for staging and development, make them much quicker for me so you can get through the work. Another thing I just thought to mention, just because I didn't want to skip over it, because there is something quite important in here. Let me just get to it so I can open it up. But yeah, in MariaDB 10.3 to 10.4, in that changeover, the following two settings were changed from their defaults. So in 10.3, optimizer row switch was off. in 10.3, use condition selectivity was 1. And then MariaDB changed it in 10.4. And again, a platform for, I don't know how long it took us, but it took us a good while to work out that it was these two settings. And there were lots of back and forth between Platform and Adobe. And we came to that these two settings had changed in that latest version, and that these were the old settings. And this changed indexing for some customers from 6 hours back down to normal, which was like 6 minutes. So please, if you're running Magento on Platform.sh, or if you're running Magento anywhere on MariaDB, please remember these settings. It might save you a lot of headaches. We also have a good example of read and write endpoints here. It's just nice to see in the config. Most of our configs are very standard. This actually gives you that read and write endpoint. And we can see we have the cache Redis database, and also the session persistent. So the nice thing about the persistent one is if we're doing a migration, or if your app is shut down, or we're doing an upgrade of the image, or you're doing an upgrade of the version, you don't lose that Redis data. That could be hundreds and thousands worth of shopping baskets. So yeah, something that I also have to review and maybe make a change to this template, and maybe just make a comment. It's always recommended when you're using Redis persistent to have 6 times as much disk. So let's say we had a Redis session service that had 512 megs of memory. We should have 3 gigs of disk space on that service. And that's because the Redis persistent process has a few extra files that it's saving. It's not just saving your exact data. It also has a few extra files where it's every now and then coalescing them into that data. So just something to remember, we do have that on our documentation page. It is there under the Redis persistent service. And I also just added, which very, very standard that we've seen lots of customers use, these 2 plugins for OpenSearch. And it's just nice, again, just to see this is how you set up a plugin for OpenSearch if you do need it. Cool. And that is our services.yaml file. Yeah, so worthy mentions, just because I want everyone to make sure that they are reviewing their code and they are checking the repo. Check your PHP ini, make sure it has all the right settings, make sure it has things like opcache enabled. That really is important. It should be enabled. Most modern apps have it enabled. Another thing, make sure you have the opcache blacklists in that PHP ini file. And that's where the opcache exclude file comes in. And there's a few files, your etc file and your env file, your env file and your config file for your app. Make sure that they're not cached. Because if you go in there and you're changing a setting, let's say you're putting your site under maintenance. We've seen on HA environments, if it is accidentally cached in opcache, your one node might stay in maintenance mode and your other nodes will carry on serving traffic. It's definitely something we've seen in production environments. So make sure your opcache exclude file is updated. The Magento vars file, it just has an example of how to do multi-sites on Magento. Again, just useful to have. App.config, we spoke about that. That's all about your ECE tools and getting that ideal state to make sure your modules are built. And then your routes.yaml. It's worth checking out, but it's nothing too complicated. We're just caching some static assets for you. So those are things, always double check.
One of the questions that just popped up is, what's the quickest and easiest way to get a performance increase? What's a quick tip that you can offer beyond these mentions here?
So I would say the quickest and easiest way to get a performance increase, straight off the bat, if you're not using a CDN, use a CDN. It really does help. But that is old school web hosting 101. And then for Magento specifically, have a look at all the Redis stuff we spoke about. It really does improve your performance. I think a lot of people have taken for granted, oh, I'm using Redis, that means my site's going to be fast. Yes, but you're limited to how fast Redis can work. If you can really improve that Redis functionality and the Redis speed, your site is going to really, really fly. So yeah, next steps. Like you said, we want to start making changes. Let's say we just do a Redis change or we just do a CDN change. How are we going to what are our next steps from there? So you can make all these changes, but you really want to start measuring them and seeing, okay, did switching on the suggestion that Jared made about Magento optimizer switch in MariaDB, did it actually improve my reindexing times? Like, you don't want to just take my word for it. You want to actually see the performance benefit in your application. So that's where you'd use tools like Blackfire and Magento Profiler to actually see, okay, cool, my reindexing time was 1 hour, now it's down to 30 minutes. Or my normal front page or catalog page times were taking 500 milliseconds to load, now they're taking 300 milliseconds to load. And it's something that a lot of customers sort of miss, and it's something that we've also seen, and we sort of mentioned it in this webinar. It's like, it's good to put your site under load, because certain things start falling over and need different configurations when you are putting it under load. So, for example, the MySQL slave readers. If under load, you just get to a point where one service can't really serve that much traffic and you have to split it out. It does mean a slight increase in response time, let's say 100, 150 milliseconds, but it also means that now you can scale up to hundreds of thousands of requests instead of just, let's say, tens of thousands. And yeah, when you're troubleshooting or when you're seeing issues, something that's always just worth checking is, can you reproduce it with the core modules? Often you might add a custom plugin and completely changes the behavior of the app, and that's where the slowdown is occurring. It's much easier to then debug the issue if you know, okay, we have 100 Magento core modules and we have 5 custom modules. Let's check if it works the same if we disable module 1, 2, or 3. So yeah, always just check. It's worth just making sure that it's not your own module or a third-party module that's actually causing the slowdown. So yeah, monitoring.
Yeah, one of the things, if you go back to the Blackfire page, we always recommend that customers just go ahead and install or set up Blackfire profiling right from the very beginning, so that you have a baseline that you're working with. And then as changes are made, you can literally go line by line or change by change in the application code or within the services like Jared was showing us today, and see how those adjustments can bring down response times or request times, and see exactly what those changes had on your in terms of speed and performance. And that's one of the great reasons why we use Blackfire and suggest Blackfire to our customers. It's one of our preferred tools from a support management standpoint, but also we're encouraging customers to continue to use Blackfire for a lot of the monitoring and especially the profiling feature that Jared was highlighting.
Yeah, it really helps our lives in support too, because it's we aren't really developers. We are platform engineers. So like, we know how the product works and we know how infrastructure works and how MySQL works, but we're not coding in like experts in every single language. But when it comes to, let's say, a PHP site like Magento, and you say, okay, let's quickly check through Blackfire, you can say, oh, yeah, I can see straight away SQL's taking 2 seconds. That doesn't seem reasonable. Oh, Redis is taking this long, or there's 5,000 calls to Redis. That can't be right. So yeah, it really does help our life and support too.
It's especially
and having a
helpful
baseline.
The tickets that come in and customers just ask for, how can I improve performance, or I'm having performance issues. This is where we jump to Blackfire right away.
It makes life a lot easier. You can say, oh, straight away, I can see you're running that query. It's either going to be your database or it's actually the query itself. So yeah, it's quite nice to use as a support engineer. Yeah. So yeah, if we have any questions, please send them through. If you want to chat to us, we have some more.
We had one question that just popped up. Said,
cool.
What version of Magento do you recommend using or running? I'll let you answer that. I'll also chime in.
Yeah. I always recommend going to check their system requirements page and running the latest version of the current branch you're on. So if you're on 2.4.4, which is still supported, use the latest patch version of 2.4.4. So I would say anything 2.4 and above. I always like to use the latest, but that also does mean you putting time into making sure that it's compatible with the latest upgrade. So, but yeah, 2.4.4. I think it's P11 or P12, that and above. So my only thing that I would employ you to do is use the latest patch version, because there are 0-day exploits that are out there that can attack those other versions. And Adobe and the community say this solves that problem if you use this version. So it's worth using the latest P version out there.
Yeah, agreed. And one of the great things about working with Adobe the last few years is we've really gotten a chance to see how their release cycles have been going out. We're getting early insight. We work with Adobe to prepare the basic infrastructure and service requirements for those early release cycles, and they've been consistent. So every year around this time, before we go into Adobe Summit, you'll start to see releases. You'll get details on beta releases in January, but usually around this time, March of every year, you'll find that Adobe has a new release or an update that they've made available for folks to start testing, and that's when we start working with customers, seeing the increase in tickets, requesting for service upgrades, and running through a number of tests and a lot of the troubleshooting that Jared showed us here today.
Yeah, just it makes you smile. I don't know if you know, Jerry's, but yeah, I've been working on the 2.4.8 testing. So there's a new version coming, and we have to check all our new versions, and does it work well with MariaDB? Does it work? Can we use Redis? I think that's been our new thing for 2.4.8 is, are we allowed to use Redis commercially anymore? So yeah, things like that. The new version of Elasticsearch, I think, is going to be supported, Elasticsearch 4. So these are all things that we've been testing for months already, getting ready for the launch.
Yeah, exactly. And we're constantly looking at feature improvements, working with our engineering team to work with Adobe and trying to understand how feature improvements make impacts on performance and of course testing and whatnot. One of the points that Stephanie in the chat made here is one of the biggest pieces of advice she'd add is don't just throw resources at the problem and forget about it. Figure out the why. I think everyone in a support role has probably agreed with that statement more often than not. Is asking why or asking what the symptoms are to the root cause of a problem is much of what our troubleshooting starts with, and working with customers to understand why certain services or why certain um, uh, processes are getting held up or bottlenecked. Not just that we want to go ahead and increase the memory limits or increase any other parts of the resources, but we want to actually get to the root and help to address that with the customer. In addition to increasing resources if it's needed, but definitely getting to the root before building up a greater bottleneck later on down the road or something like that.
Yeah, and I have a perfect example from something I think I was working on today, where a customer was, "Hey, I have my average consumption per PHP process is 4 gigs. How do I scale?" And it's like, well, we should have been helping you way before your average consumption per PHP process got to 4 gigs. We don't want it that hard because you can't scale. Like PHP shouldn't be using 4 gigs to serve a web page. Obviously, there are exceptions. Like if you're doing an export of data, you do want it to get up to 4 gigs, but you don't want every single page load to be that big. So yeah, again, Blackfire is great in that sort of aspect where you can actually see what it's doing.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm just having a look for any more questions here.
No, I don't think we have. There's some links in the channel with folks that from the platform side that have been helping and linking to the blog post. If we find that this is successful for our customers or folks in the Magento space that find value in this, we'd be happy to turn this into a series and we can continue the conversation, continue to offer recommendations and improvements while providing evidence, of course, and sharing some of our findings and feedbacks, especially as new releases come out and new features that we're always testing against Magento. This is a great opportunity for us to just continue this conversation and take it forward with the community.
Yeah. and keep your eye on that repo, because yeah, I'm going to try and keep it as live as possible. I will be updating it. It's not something that's going to be abandonware anytime soon. Yeah, I have committed to look after that repo, so I'll make sure that all the best practices are in. I think there's even a few changes that just from going over and prepping for the webinar and the blog post, that maybe we can just like put a little bit more comments in there and just explain a little bit more in the actual template itself.
Absolutely.
So yeah, keep your eyes on it.
So thanks, Jared, for preparing and bringing a ton of value here to all the folks that have joined us today. There's going to be access to these recordings and, of course, the blog posts that we've mentioned several times that folks can then take this information off on their own and start taking a look at their own Magento build and how it interacts with our infrastructure and start to apply those recommendations right away. And of course, if you haven't already, taking a look back at Blackfire and making sure that you're profiling a lot of the changes that you're making to see how it impacts or improves performance on your site.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks, guys. And again, any questions, anything, if you are a customer, drop us a ticket if you have anything. Oh, my site doesn't have this relationship, or I want to know what this might do to my site. Please just send us a ticket, send us an email. If you want to have a one-on-one session, there's a calendar. You can book a 30-minute session with us too. So thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.